Like I said last week, we can go home now. You know, I must be a man of very sincere faith to try to add anything to the sentiment of gratitude. It can't be done. Not just to those who sing, but to the whole notion. All those gifts. Each and every one. This Sunday in the world of the Protestant churches, they're reading the story of Lazarus. There are two Lazaruses in the Christian scripture. One is in a parable that we're not telling. Jesus told many parables, more than one Lent can absorb. But the other one is a story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead immediately prior to Holy Week. And I'm telling you this because it's being used as a mechanism today in over 1,000 churches across the country to lift up the real progress that's taking place in Africa to combat and deal with AIDS. That literally millions of lives, and we are grateful that the United States had a piece of that, and I'm grateful that our former president helped that happen. Saving literally millions of people, because for 40 cents a day, people who would be dead with HIV/AIDS are now alive, and they will stay healthy, at least healthy enough to be alive. And I bring that up because there's so much we hear that's discouraging. I'm not even finding a good word for it. Is it the cackling of the chickens in Congress all week long, which seemed to be all about how important they were standing up for their principles and somehow didn't address us. And we see the struggle going on in Libya. We hear of the continuing struggles in Afghanistan and Iraq, and yet another earthquake in Japan. I like to grab for a fragment of hope. It doesn't have to be hopeful all day. Just give me a little bit. And so when I heard about this morning, the Lazarus Project, I said, yes. There's a little hope there, just a little bit. And sometimes, as I pointed out last week, all you need is one light to light a few others. And I need your help, as I do every week, because the only sermon that happens is the one we make together. And so I need a little bit of hope. I need you to help me. I need your confidence, your forbearance, your care, your willingness to help create a sermon out of the few minutes we have, or at least try to wrestle a stone of hope out of the mountain of despair. So as I say every week, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be true in your sight and in the sight of the one who is my rock and my Redeemer. So all this Lent, I've been going back to get Jesus. He's all over the place, by the way. You can see him everywhere, but we don't talk about him much around here because we're a non-creedal church and we don't want to force people to believe one thing or another. But the loss has been that we have not taken the strength and the gifts and the power and the right to follow this magnificent prophet, this early religious radical. And so I'm hoping that you've become reacquainted with the dangerous Jesus, the rabble-rousing, confounding, countercultural Jesus you've seen inklings of in the songs from Godspell. And I want to review for you where we've been so far, because while they're not in any particular sequence, they do all hold together in what I would hope is a seamless fabric of hope. When I started this, I preached to you the doctrine of inclusion. This is something that the former Pentecostal preacher, he's still Pentecostal, just that he's not welcome there anymore, Carlton Pearson, called it when he had the insight that perhaps God was not sending anyone to hell, which of course became news again when our local star, Rob Bell, wrote a book that kind of hinted at that, but didn't quite go all the way. But it sure enough poked the eyes of a few people who want to make sure that only the good people get in and the bad people stay out. And I tied that to the message of the prodigal son, because as this older son in that parable feels it's cheating, the younger son went off and spent all the money and still gets to come back. But of course, it's the father who is the center of that story, who can live with neither, is only rejoicing when all his children our home with him. So, yeah, be a grieved elder son, but you're not the one making the decision here. We could say that about a lot of religious groups. If you really believe God is your father, that's not your decision to make. Second, in the next sermon, I talked and said, well, if this is true, that there is no hell to frighten people away or to consign them to, then all this sorting out of goats and sheep and wheat and chaff and clean and unclean makes no sense. Because God isn't about to send some people over there because they're dirty and keep some people over here because they're clean. If they're all going to be one people, one creation of God's going to take everything and hold on to it, then who cares who is taller or shorter or fatter or thinner or Christian or not or black or white or rich or poor? And it's, again, taking a different vantage point. And the parable of the Pharisee and the publican that Jesus told about the righteous man boasting of how he was holier than the tax collector reminded us that no one can claim to be closer to God or better than another human being in any real sense of the word. And then I went on and said, well, if these things are true, that there is no hell to which we should throw people, and therefore no need to be sorting people into artificial groups, religious and otherwise, then the parable of the sower needs to be seen not as growing good grain that will be harvested and sent to heaven, but more like Johnny Appleseed, casting seed into the ground to grow and serve those all around them, not just to be saved for some future date. And this week, the parable of the unjust judge. It's one of the hardest ones to understand because it seems as though Jesus is saying, nag, 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 it's okay. Or conversely, doesn't matter if you're good or bad, just be true to your values. These are inconsistent with our value, with our sense of what Jesus is talking about. And that makes us ponder, and then we wonder, what's this parable all about? And that's the moment when the parable works, because the parables are not intended to teach you a lesson. They're intended to get you to think. Just think. And say, is that the way the world really is? That makes no sense. And this is exactly what scholars have been saying Jesus is about. That his message is to say, the way you think the world is, it's not like that. It's different than that. And not only is it going to be different later, it's different now if you open your eyes and let yourself see. And so these parables are intended to confound us, to bother us, to upset our sense of what is true and false, right and wrong, and reliable and unreliable. What does it mean when a prophet says, nag, nag, nag? It doesn't mean go out there and bother people, does it? We have to think, and that's the heart of our religious tradition. We can't phone it in. We can't sign up on the dotted line and know we're done. We can't just go through the motions. If you're in a liberal church of any variety, at some point you need to be walking out of here saying, darn, I wish I could understand that. I don't get it. Boy, that preacher makes no sense at all. Yes, I have succeeded. Now I'm going to venture my version, one version of billions of what the unjust judge is telling us. To me, it describes the conflict, or shall we say the tension between two kinds of power in the world. I'll call them hard power and soft power. Hard power is official power. It is the law. It is money. It is strength. It is military. It is the state. It is tradition. It is all the things that we know we can depend upon. The judge is a representative of hard power. He has the authority of the state. He has the ability to exact judgments. He decides who is guilty and who is innocent. And the woman, the widow, comes and keeps saying, give me justice. Now, did she go through the channels? Did she file the petitions? Did she get counsel? Did she do all the right things? Apparently not. She just keeps showing up. Give me justice. Can you imagine that happen to you every day? You go into your courtroom and someone is saying, give me justice. What would the judge say? Remove that woman. She is in contempt of court. But in a lesser variety, haven't you all had someone, if you're a parent, you know exactly what I mean, who just wouldn't stop nagging. Daddy, 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 mommy. And they tug on your sleeve and they say, and eventually what happens? What happens? One of two things. You punish them or you give in. The child, the widow, the powerless are using soft power. What a member of this church reminded me is the way to success. Gentle pressure, relentlessly applied. Now, it can be used for ill, there's no question. The powerless can ask for the wrong thing and the powerful can do the good, but we tend to think in this world that the hard powers, the money, the institutions, the legalities, are the ones that we should have. So we build institutions and pass laws and expect the hard powers to settle the matters. But we forget that it's the soft powers that really change the world. And here's a great example. During the military junta period of Argentina, they literally abducted people off the streets and from homes, put them in prisons. And when the prisons were full, they took them up in airplanes and threw them out the door into the ocean. And they didn't tell anyone about that. But you know something? People noticed their absence. We always notice the absences. And who notices the absence more than a parent? And so some of the mothers of the desaparecidos, mothers of the disappeared, decided they would ask the government to tell them where their son was. And so they got together on the Plaza de la Maya. Forgive me while I leave the pulpit, but you have to see it. And they would literally get in a circle on the plaza wearing their white handkerchiefs, and they would walk around in a circle holding signs saying, "Where is my son?" Every Thursday they would walk in this circle, "Where is my son?" Can you hear the widow and the unjust judge? "Where is my son? Where is my son? Where is my son?" And they wore the government down one step at a time by insisting that the hard powers explain themselves. And do you think the generals were comfortable incarcerating little mummies with their babushkas? No, they wouldn't do it. And then there were more mothers saying, "Where is my son?"